All right, welcome back to the George Poulos podcast. Feeling inspired to do a topic-based episode today. So for the past few episodes, I've just been really going straight at it with the stream of consciousness. And the topic episodes are still stream of consciousness, but there's kind of this like inspiration to focus the stream of consciousness towards a particular topic. That's very meta. What we're going to talk about in this episode is my journey with pronouns. Because in the past, I would have never thought of myself as someone who would use he, they pronouns, right? It's just when you grow up as a boy or a man in this society, you kind of just assume that that's who you are, right? But because of the spiritual journey, I really just began to take a look at everything. My gender, my sexuality, the way that I fell in love, the way that I did relationships, the hobbies I was interested. I started to take a look at everything because it became very clear to me that as I grew up, the world, the society, all of these outside forces told me who I was, right? But I hit a point where I realized that I hadn't actually decided anything for myself. So this has been a really fascinating journey, and it's really tied with everything. This expansive process of discovering myself and really discovering that I am limitless, and really deciding to use he, they pronouns is about embodying my limitlessness. Right, because I no longer see myself as a person who needs to conform to a gender norm, to the role of being a man or of being a he, him, right? Some shout outs before we get into this episode. My guest appearance on Nathaniel Drew's podcast, No Backup Plan, is out now. I'll leave a link to our conversation in the description or the show notes. We had a beautiful conversation here in the studio, rambling about life, spirituality, non-duality, conditioning, deconditioning, great stuff. If you like listening to my solo podcast, you'll definitely like our conversation. So that will be in the description. And it's always important for me to plug something. I am in the process of considering an apartment move that you may have heard me talking about. So financial support is very helpful in that process. So a couple things you can do to support me that hopefully will also benefit you as well. I'm offering one-on-one spiritual chats for just $25, 40-minute conversation where we can hash out whatever spiritual predicament you find yourself in, or we can just sit on that Zoom call and share a moment of presence and feel out and see how it unfolds. You can also support my merch, georgepoulos.com/store. And of course, the Patreon, where episodes are always ad-free. Okay, enough of this self-promo. Let's get into the topic. So, context. Yeah, I was obviously raised as a boy. And it's interesting what our society does is it has assigned gender roles, right? It's like most likely most parents are not even thinking about this. If you have a baby and it's a boy, you start unconsciously assigning these particular attributes, particular roles. You assume what that child is going to be interested in. You slowly start molding that boy into the societal archetype of man, and vice versa for women. Obviously, we're at a point in society where these gender norms are being questioned. And I think for good reason, because I think these gender norms we find ourselves in can be extremely inhibitive. The whole journey I'm on, what is it really about? What it's really about is looking into oneself, feeling what your heart wants to do, who your heart wants to be, and acting on that, following your heart blindly, full out, just being who you want to be. That can be very difficult. And this is more general than just gender and pronouns. when society kind of imposes who you are onto you, you can feel these leanings of the heart. And because we were conditioned to be certain people and to follow certain rules and stereotypes and traditions, it can be very difficult to follow the leanings of the heart, right? We all have leanings of the heart. And when you have that leaning of the heart, and when you suppress it deep down inside and you try not to let it out, because that leaning of the heart differs from what the society expects of you, when your leanings of the heart are not normal, when they're weird, when they're different, it's very tempting to push those things inside so you don't have to deal with the outside judgment, you don't have to deal with being an outsider, etc. The issue is there's a reason we have these leanings and these callings from inside, from within. There's a reason. Those are communications from source. That's the universe trying to flower through you. That's your inner being trying to blossom. When you suppress that in favor of who society wants you to be, it inevitably leads to disharmony, depression, anxiety, stress, suffering, misery, all of these terrible things. Whereas when you have the courage to prioritize who you are inside over all of the external rules, which are completely arbitrary anyway, you really just start to feel this surge of joy. You really do. You start to blossom like a flower. You start to bloom like a tree in the spring. You start to really externalize who you are, right? Your internal and your external fall into harmony. And that's when you're really acting in this very beautiful, flowy, present, aligned way. And it just feels so good. And it's my view that when you and it's not an easy journey because our conditioning runs very deep, right? We were taught at a very vulnerable age that we had to act certain ways. So it's not easy to unlearn these things. But my view is that when you fully just live heart first, when you fully just follow your heart and be who you are in your inside world and in your outside world, when you're perfectly in harmony like that, there's really no place for depression. Even when things aren't necessarily perfectly joyous, even if like you're not having an incredible day, if you're living in harmony, it's like much easier to ride the waves of life, the ups and downs of life. But this gets very difficult when you're in the habit of suppressing yourself and hiding who you are and trying to be someone else. Those are really the sources of the deepest disharmony we can feel. Anyways, I never took a look at pronouns or gender. I was always like pretty comfortable being a boy, being a man, all of this, right? But it was the spiritual journey that started to make me, I was forced to look at all of the assumptions I made about myself. I was forced to look at all of the ways in which outside sources told me who I was, right? I just simply had to, because I realized, holy shit, like all this stuff is an illusion. Like I don't yet know myself. So I had to start taking a look, and it's very uncomfortable and scary at first because you're so used to, right? It's very comfortable to remain in that shell, to stay in that shell, with the gender roles that you've been given at birth, with the career path that your parents and the school system told you should take. It's very comfortable to enter loving relationships exactly how the society and the movies portray them, right? It's very comfortable to remain in that like ego shell of protection. And as you start to chip away at that ego shell, and you start to chip away at all of the beliefs that you inherited without even taking a look at them, you start to see this dazzling light of freedom, of being able to be truly anybody. You start to see this dazzling light coming through the cracks in that ego shell as you hammer away at it with practices like meditation, spirituality, reading spiritual thinkers, whatever your spiritual path is, whatever your mechanism for cracking through that ego shell, whatever your mechanism is for ripping that ego mask off, you start to see the dazzling light of freedom, the truth that you can be anybody, the truth that you are nobody, therefore you can be anybody. It starts to come in, but at first it's extremely scary. It's extremely intimidating and it makes perfect sense because you've been in that shell. You've been wearing that mask. It's been very safe, very comfortable for years. You could be in that shell for 20 plus years, 30 years, 40 years, right? It's, you could go most of your life before you have an experience of waking up, right? So when you start to wake up, when you start to see that light, it's overwhelming, it's scary, and this is completely normal, right? And it's normal to see the light and get so scared by it that you revert back into your shell and you go back to the labels and the ways of being that you're comfortable with. But it's almost like once you see the light, you can never unsee it, and the intuitive pull towards the light, towards that utter freedom, towards that unconditional love for yourself, for who you really are, that pull to explore that, it never quite goes away. And that's why I'm doing this podcast, is because I just keep being pulled towards the light, and it's just so dazzling that I can't look away anymore. And I still have moments where I revert back into my shell, where I live in a more comfortable, a more fear-based way. But even when I slip out of it these days, I'm so aware of the light that it's going to pull me back towards it eventually, and I'm going to start coming out of my shell again. And, it's like on this journey, like each time you make a crack in that shell, each time you remove your mask a little bit, that work never goes away. There's just more light coming in. There's more truth coming in. So even when you go into hiding again, when you put that mask back on, it's like the light is still, it's now seeping through the cracks that you've made. The stream of consciousness is taking over. But when I sat down, I had more of a linear story in my mind, which maybe I'll get into now. So, right. Always used he, him pronouns. Didn't even question it. Really, college was the first time I had ever met anybody using different pronouns. In high school, I didn't meet a single person who was using they pronouns, didn't meet a single trans person. In fact, in high school, most people who were gay were not open about that, right? My upbringing was very, very heteronormative. He, him, straight guys, and she, her, straight girls. Very rigid, very, very normal. College was the first time that I started to actually meet people who were breaking outside of these rigid norms. But it was a long time before I actually started to consider this kind of a journey myself. There was a turning point for me, and it was at this festival where I did psychedelics. Right, and this festival was chock full of people who were not playing the normal gender game. Chock full of trans people, non-binary people, people on different ends of the sexuality spectrum. Just lots of people who were not fitting into the normal standard of man and woman. Right? So I was surrounded by these people, and this festival was full of love and openness, and it felt like a utopia in a sense. It was just so aligned, so peaceful, so loving, right? And I had the psychedelic experience I had was extremely powerful, extremely powerful. It was actually a first time I had heard of this substance called sassafras, or MDA, which they say is one molecule off from MDMA. But from experience, and I've tried both of these substances, MDA or sassafras is much more akin to a psychedelic experience like mushrooms or acid compared to Molly. And I know Molly can have effects like that as well, really can make you feel the love, absolutely. But MDA I found very psychedelic, visuals, experiences of God, experiences of oneness, this sort of thing. And what I remember experiencing is all of these people at the festival who had broken free of the gender norms. And when I say that, I mean, it's like with many of them, I couldn't tell whether they were a man or a woman. Lots of people using they, them pronouns. People dressing non-conventionally, this sort of thing. Really just people embodying freedom, just totally unlimited by this man or woman construct. What I noticed on these psychedelics, and I was having profound visual hallucinations, or I actually don't like to say hallucinations with psychedelics because I think that what we see on psychedelics is truth. These are, even the visuals, these are things that we are capable of seeing while sober. It's just that we've trained our minds towards a highly limited view of reality. But anyways, on this psychedelic experience, I was seeing people's energy. I was seeing people's auras. Not sure if I've shared this before on the podcast, but a recurring visual that I experience on psychedelics, and I would love to hear if anybody else has had this experience, is I tend to see this sort of like tribal face paint on people's faces. My interpretation of this is that I'm viewing their soul. I'm viewing their aura, their energy. I can spot someone across the festival and see this glow-in-the-dark tribal face paint on their face. And it's like I feel like there's an instant knowing. Whether I've met them before or not, I instantly know them. I instantly see them fully. There's an instant, full transfer of communication, a completely open flow between us. And I'll see this like tribal face paint on everybody, and everybody's is different. Some people's are pink. Some people's are all black, all different sorts of patterns. This beautiful face paint. Many people's were glow in the dark at this particular festival. And this happened to me, fascinating to me, this happened to me again when I took LSD with my current partner, Julia. She had pink face paint on, and it's just like, wow, like I really see you. I really see you. So I had this experience with all these people, and I noticed that the gender non-conforming individuals were just so bright. That face paint was so bright. That energetic aura that I could see visually because of the psychedelic was just beaming with love and light. Just absolutely pulsating. Just this tremendous energy emitting from them. Right? This was an undeniable experience. This experience forced me to take a look at gender constraints, pronouns, and things like this. The difference, literally visually, because of the psychedelics, which aided me in seeing the truth, the people who were non-gender conforming were just booming with way more love and light. Not to compare, right? We're all God. But what I experienced was these people were booming with way more love and light than those who were kind of playing the part of man or woman. And at the time, I was very much playing the part of man unconsciously, right? So that was probably the first like key moment in this journey of pronouns and gender. And then the next thing that would really expand this for me and actually push me towards choosing to use he, they pronouns was through dating, through love and dating and seeking a relationship. Okay, so that summer at that festival experience, I was fairly newly single. And I had already been kind of dating around. And I was using he, him pronouns, right? And I was using the dating apps and going on dates and all this. And my spiritual journey was really taking off at this point. And I started to become aware of this sensation that, right, I was being very open on my dates that like I am in a very intense experience of self-discovery. I feel like I don't really know myself. I felt like there was this pressure on dates to kind of define myself, to say who I was. This is very common, to say your intentions, to say what you're looking for, right? But I'm starting to come to this experience where I'm having trouble stating my intentions, because I am coming into this faith that I don't know the future. I don't need to know the future. I can act spontaneously in the present, follow my heart in the present moment. So I was starting to have this, to feel this pressure to define myself, right? Because when you're dating, people are looking for certain kinds of relationships. I started to notice that as I went on these dates, there was this subconscious, unspoken pressure to move towards, they call it the relationship escalator, to move towards this very standard kind of relationship. It's like you go on a first date. If you get along well, you probably go on a second date. If you get along well, you probably go on a third. There's certain expectations and ideas about like when you're going to kiss and when you're going to have sex. And if you keep seeing each other again and again, there's certain expectations about, okay, it feels like we're maybe moving into something exclusive. We're texting a certain amount. I feel the image of a water slide comes up to me. It's like, if you go on a first date with someone and you get along, I almost feel like you unconsciously, without words sometimes, step into a water slide and you start sliding down it towards this like normal standard relationship, almost without, right? It's like a water slide. It's like taking you. It's like you're not really trying to go there. You're like, both of you are just falling into this pattern, right? That we've been taught, that we've played out so many times. And it's really fascinating. And I started to realize, as someone who presented, particularly I've always kind of been a dating app person, right? And I'm like, back then, I feel like if you saw my dating app profile, it would scream like normal man, And so I think people would see this and they would make assumptions about me and about how I was as a person, how I was as a dater, how I was sexually, all of these things, right? There's just this assumption that you're going to act like a man, essentially. And I think this is further than just dating. Dating is where I happen to learn it. But these assumptions about who you are if you're a man, how you're going to act, how you're going to be, how you're going to think, this applies to all of life, not just dating. It applies to like careers, passions, just the way you act when you're walking on the sidewalk. It's like all permeating. There's like these subconscious rules that we feel like we need to follow as men in all these different situations. Interacting with friends, interacting with lovers, interacting with strangers, interacting with our careers, right? All of these things. And I started to feel, I really became conscious of, I've spoken about this before, I really became conscious when the person sitting across from me on a date had an idea of who I was, right? I don't feel like, I started to feel like it's not really my job to, right? I'm all for that open and honest communication, but I started to feel like, I feel this burden of trying to escape this box that people already have for me in their subconscious minds. Like, I want to meet someone and be able to just be present without these models, without these labels, just fully be present and explore the truth of the moment together. Right? Is this coming through? This is what I started to feel through the dating. I had experiences where I would act a little bit maybe differently than a man is supposed to in certain situations. And like, the other person would be like confused or somehow threatened. Yeah. This is a big thing. So anyways, I started to realize, and I was on a journey as well. This is probably important context of questioning the kind of relationship that I wanted to get into, right? I've always known that I love love and I love loving people. But this particular summer, and it ties in with the spiritual journey and the opening of my mind as well, I started to question the monogamy. And I've done a whole episode about monogamy and non-monogamy. But I was being very honest with people that, hey, like, I don't know where I'm at with this. I don't know if I want to enter a monogamous relationship anymore. And I noticed that even when I told people that up front, they would still we would enter this water slide, this unconscious automatic relationship escalator towards a normal ass relationship. Like exactly what I was trying to avoid. I was trying to avoid slipping into the labels and the traditions and the normalcy. I noticed that even with that level of upfront, honest communication about how confused I am about the whole monogamy thing, I would still hit a point with people where they are starting to kind of subtly enforce these rules about the relationship escalator, right? It's been a certain amount of dates, so we should start acting this way, this sort of thing. So, and at this point, a lot of things are not, something's off with this. And it's at this point where I started to realize, like, is it because I'm presenting as a normal man that it's assumed that I'm going to be following this absolutely normal and traditional path when dating? And so the first place I actually went for the he, they pronouns was my Hinge profile. And instantly, I started to attract more open-minded people who, when I met them, I could feel it, that they were not, they had less of a model for me, much less of a model for me. I feel like, so my feeling is, my hypothesis is that when you see someone's profile and their pronouns are he, they, for example, you're like, okay, this person is not quite following the rules. So I feel like it makes sense that you would make less assumptions about them. I mean, it's funny to say this because that is an assumption as well. Like, if you see he, they, you make the assumption that they're a little bit more open, but this seems like a good thing to basically, no, what, it is a good thing. What it is I found that once I put the he, they pronouns on Hinge, the people I was meeting were more willing to just find out who I was instead of having an assumption, right? So this instantly made me feel like I was in more of a place of freedom. I felt more comfortable being myself, right? I started to, on these dates, right? This is why I say dating is a spiritual practice. I started feeling like this weight was lifted off. Like suddenly I don't have to act according to what I think a man has to act like. Suddenly I started feeling like, okay, I can be weird. I can be questioning whether I like monogamy. I can be fruity. I can be sentimental. I can be emotional. I don't have to necessarily steer the whole damn thing. Like, there's a heavy expectation on men that we are the pursuers. We wear the pants. We take the lead. In my personal case, like, that's great now and then, but that pressure to always be like, and I'm also coming to a place, like, the spiritual journey is making me just more receptive, more accepting of what is. It's making me realize that, like, I don't have to manipulate situations to get what I want. So then I started to be unsettled when I'm there meeting someone and they're just waiting for me to like control the whole situation. Right, this journey with the dating and switching to the he they pronouns, I found that I feel freer, I feel better about just showing up and being present and being myself, right? The much of the limitations suddenly vanished. And this felt so good and so beautiful to be free, to feel freer in this way when relating with people and when going on dates. It enabled me so much more, with so much less resistance, to follow my heart and speak my truth and really be myself and be radically honest in those moments. It just felt so amazing that it was like unquestionable that this was a good idea for me, right? So then I put them on Instagram, and it's funny that I do really, I think about the he, they in terms of social media. I'm not really meeting people and being like, hi, I'm George, he, they. And maybe I'll get there, but because these assumptions that I described with the dating, these models that people have, if you go out there presenting as a man, many people will unconsciously create a model in their head for you and kind of assume that you are this certain way, right? But what I found is that using he, they pronouns loosened that expectation, that model in other people, so I was freer to be myself, right? So then I did it on Instagram, and social media is a big part of my life. It's where I express myself freely, and it's where Mel Robbins said something beautiful that I always think about, and it's that social media is a place for you to expand. It's a place for you to embody who you want to become, right? So to me, it makes perfect sense. And it's funny because a dating app profile can be considered the same way. You can make those brave first steps, right? Because your high school friends, your college friends, your friends from the past, your family, they're not seeing your dating profile. So it really can be a place where you can take that courageous first step in expanding your identity, right? In questioning your sexuality, and questioning your pronouns, questioning your gender, questioning whether you want to be monogamous or polyamorous or a relationship anarchist, and all these things, right? So I see Hinge, or a dating app, in that way too. It's a way to present who you are becoming. And then the next step I took was social media, right? So I started to present myself this way in social media. And again, I felt like I could be more emotional on Instagram, more sentimental, more creative, more artistic. I almost said autistic. It's funny. Does your guys' TikTok algorithm think you're autistic too? That's been a funny thing. I feel like it's kind of common, actually. Right? So then I put he, they on Instagram, and it feels good. It feels good. And this obviously has been a part of my greater spiritual awakening and just questioning all the limitations I've imposed on myself. But it was also really sparked by that experience at the festival, just seeing the vibrant souls of those non-gender conforming individuals, those beautiful, beautiful human beings, really sparked this particular awakening journey for me of questioning my pronouns. And it's felt nothing but incredible and freeing and liberating. God, there are so many, and it's not tangible. It's not tangible. It's not something that someone has gone out and written on paper. Like, if you're a man, you have to act these certain ways. But you feel it. There's an unspoken contract in this society of how you're supposed to act if you're a man, and vice versa if you're a woman, right? So it can be extremely liberating. And I'm trying to approach a place where I don't need any labels, but as you can feel from my story, the he, they label is one of opening and expansion, and it's right. I don't really feel the need to label myself, but what it's about is communication with others. It's about clicking something in the other person's mind. Okay, I don't quite know this person yet. I shouldn't make assumptions. Let me find out who they are. right? So it's about the communication, right? I'm not, right? I've learned so much about the ego and how I should drop it. Like I don't have a piece of paper with ego on it, and I didn't add he, they to my ego definition of who I am. It's simply like a mechanism to drop the constraints of what it means to be a man and help others understand that I ain't fucking normal, right? Like I'm not going to follow the rules, and hopefully they will. And right, it's like it's an effort to tell someone like, please try not to put me in your box, you know? So an incredible journey, really an incredible journey that I never thought, you know, when this, you know, when this sort of thing, when pronouns like hit the mainstream cultural awareness, never did I think I would participate in it. Honestly, I was kind of confused. But now I interpret that confusion as me being so deep in my conditioning that I wasn't ready to question it, right? Like I was so deep in that shell that I talked about at the beginning of the episode. Not enough light was coming through yet. I was so deep in my shell. I was like, why would anybody question their gender or their pronouns? It doesn't really make sense, right? But now enough of the light is coming in that I'm like, oh, I get it. It's not fun to be in the rigid role of manhood. It's miserable. It sucks. It's terrible, right? The journey is about following the call of your heart in whichever direction it goes. And when you have an inhibitive label such as man, it gets very difficult. It's very straining. It's very painful to battle between, should I follow the unspoken rules of being a man, or should I follow my heart leaning that's taking me in another direction? This battle is very painful. It causes suffering. It causes dissonance. And again, when you end up suppressing your heart's calling and you choose to be a man instead, that shit hurts. That shit causes depression. That's how you become. I mean, it's just an example of like, of worshiping the ego. You're literally like, you're sacrificing your soul because you're worshiping the ego, and that's never a good idea. Never a good idea. So to wrap out the dating story, right? I'm currently dating someone who I mention once in a while on this podcast, and right, because I met her during a time where I was feeling like, oh, I don't need to act like a man. I can fully be myself 100% completely. I can put it all on the table. I've attracted a partner who knows me, who really knows me, right? For the first time in my life, this has happened. I've attracted a partner who knows who I am inside of that ego shell, right? And this is very beautiful. This is very beautiful. This is why we're all driven towards dating and relationships. It's to show who we are inside of the shell. But admittedly, it's scary because we're worried we will not be accepted. And in many cases, we will not be accepted. But all that means is that they are in their shell as well. And if you're showing your light and someone's too deep in their shell, right? Like I said, it's going to frighten them. Like I said, it frightened me earlier on in my journey. Seeing the light was frightening, right? I couldn't connect with people who were free. I couldn't connect with people who loved unconditionally. That was way too scary. That was way too threatening. It's threatening because those truths will penetrate and destroy the shell of your ego, destroy the shell of your mask. So if you're not ready, it is very scary to interact with these people who are beaming love, right? When you think about people who like are against trans people and like against pronoun switches or whatever, that's what's happening. They're so deep in their shell of protection, they can't stand the thought that they may be able to expand themselves. the thought that they might be more than a man or more than a woman is so frightening to them, because they haven't cracked at their shell yet. There's not enough light coming in. When they see the light, they shade their eyes and they retreat back into their shell. That's why some people have these like bigoted reactions to that sort of thing. It's a fear reaction. They're terrified that they might be more than their ego, that they might be more than who they think they are. And it is scary. It's rightfully scary, because all these people were conditioned too. And it's terrifying that you might be infinite. But man, when you step into it, god damn, it's beautiful. God damn, it's beautiful to be fucking infinite. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced. I got a great comment the other day that I want to address. Patreon.com/George Poulos will get you the podcast without ads every week. And I prioritize questions and comments to address live on the podcast on Patreon. So, okay, and the question is, what actually is attachment, right? Because on this podcast, we talk a lot about non-attachment in terms of relationships, in terms of your job, in terms of your circumstances, right? What is non-attachment? I think this term is born in Buddhism. And while I've read a lot of Buddhism, this is by no means going to be an official response. But let me describe what non-attachment is for me, right? So attachment is essentially the resistance of change. If we envision ourselves in the meditation posture, sitting like the Buddha, the world is going to go on changing around us. You see, usually what happens before we're enlightened is we find ourselves in this particular moment and we attach ourselves to these circumstances, right? I'm attached to this apartment that I'm in. I'm attached to this creative practice of doing the podcast. I'm attached to my partner, my relationship, right? We grab onto, we take a hold of an external circumstance and we attach our identity to it. We think that this circumstance makes me who I am, so I need to make sure it stays the same. This is particularly poignant with relationships. We have this tendency when we meet someone and we connect with them, we have this tendency to grab a hold of it, to really want to keep it, to make sure that it stays the same, because in this moment we really like it. So, and it makes us happy and it makes us feel less alone. So the tendency is to attach, to grab on, to take hold, to resist the possibility that it may change, to resist the possibility that this relationship may someday end, right? Because in this moment, it feels so good. We want to project that good feeling into the future, and we think that by attaching, we will secure that good feeling into the future. The problem is think about your whole life, envision your whole life as if it's passed by while you've been sitting there like the Buddha. Despite all your efforts to keep things the same, look at your past. Things have gone on changing. And now you're in the present, and here you are, and these are your circumstances, but take a moment to envision the future. Things will go on changing. Things will go on changing. So the issue with attachment is it causes suffering. It causes suffering because no matter how hard you attach to something, whether it's a relationship, a job, a circumstance, an identity, no matter how hard you cling on to it, things are going to change. Certain things will fall away. Certain things will morph. New things will come in. Things are going on changing. Just look at the trees. They're in a constant state of change. One season, they're bursting with green leaves. One season, the leaves are turning crispy and brown, and then they're falling off. And in the next season, the trees are exploding with flowers, right? And reproducing and spreading all this energy and fragrance. nature is change. Our bodies are in a constant state of flux. Our existence is temporary. We are like a breath. Our whole life is like a single breath. We slowly expand from nothing, and then we flower and expand and spread our fragrance and spread our creativity and spread our love. And then just like we expanded, we contract until we disappear back into the existence and we merge back into the whole. A relationship is the same way. It comes out of nowhere. It comes out of nowhere, and then over time it grows and it blossoms, right? And this blossoming could exist through the point of death, but it's also likely, it's very possible, that relationship will also fade back into nothingness. This is just the reality, right? But we when things are beautiful, when things are blossoming, that's when it's the most tempting to attach. But it's like, you don't want to be, it's like, like, here's an image, like a flower is blooming, so you grab onto it and you don't let go. And you don't let go, and the seasons change, and now the flower's dead. And you're still holding on because you're thinking about that beautiful point where it peaked, where it bloomed. But you're still holding on to the dead flower. The problem is now you're not open to all the new beauty that's coming, all the new change that's coming. You're attached to this old thing. It's a dead thing now. So in that way, attachment causes suffering, and non-attachment, it's the grief doesn't go away. Grief is natural. When things change, you grieve. That doesn't go away. These certain intense emotions and painful feelings, they don't go away as things change and as you embrace change. But you eliminate the suffering that comes from resisting the change and embracing change and going through those ups and downs. It's that whole thing is very beautiful. It's very, very beautiful. Even the lows, even when you have to let something go, it's incredibly beautiful, even though it might be emotionally intense. But resisting change, that's an ugly pain. That's a really ugly pain, because the universe is continually trying to shower you with gifts, with new things, with new beauties to enjoy. When you cling on to the past, when you've attached to that one beautiful form, you close off, and that's a pain of resistance that we can get rid of simply by letting go and floating downstream again, and then we'll run into more and more beauty. That's how I see attachment, and that's why I think non-attachment is very important and very beautiful. And another thing is, if you're not exerting so much energy holding on to that flower so tightly as it's blooming, then you can simply enjoy the beauty for what it is, and it's more beautiful when you're not attaching to the beauty. It's much more beautiful. It brings much more joy. When you attach, you tend to, first of all, you exert so much energy trying to attach, trying to resist a change that is inevitable. That exerts so much energy that you're not as receptive to the beautiful experience. So the path is to be open and embrace what comes. Everything is like a breath. It's like a breath. It comes out of nowhere. It hits its peak and then it fades back. And is it sad? Kind of. Kind of, it is sad. I don't think you can really escape that. But that's the thing, is what you're trying to do when you attach so hard, is you're trying to escape that sadness. But the thing is, it's there anyway. It is what it is. It's there anyway. Resisting it and trying to turn a blind eye to change, it causes a much more tense, uncomfortable kind of suffering. And you're not enjoying the peaks as much when you do that, because you're suffocating. Okay, that's going to be it. If you resonated with this, again, I welcome you to share your thoughts. And what I'm doing on this podcast is trying to get my ego out of the way and trying to express myself really spontaneously, really channeling source. And what I want to suggest is that you also try to do the same when you leave your comments and responses. Really just let it come out. That's how we're going to be able to collectively really tap into the truth and really tap into the discussions that the universe wants us to have, right? Not the discussions our ego wants us to have, but the discussions that the universe wants us to have. And we'll get there if we all participate in this, in the freedom of this moment, in the not worrying about what we say, in the just letting it come out and dancing in all of it in the present. Thank you for sharing this beautiful moment with me, sending love throughout the rest of your day or evening, and I will see you next week on the journey. Namaste.